Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto raised Sailor Jupiter as his daughter? Chapter 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. I've always dreaded venturing into the Never Never. It didn't matter how prepared I was, how necessary it was, or how much time it saved. The idea of stepping into the equivalent of Wonderland on steroids always triggered the deep, primitive, reptilian section of my hindbrain. Whenever I opened a tear into that pseudo-dimension, I instinctively envied those preternatural creatures that literally had eyes in the back of their head. At least then I would have a better chance of seeing the slobbering beasts that enjoyed sneaking up on travelers. Perhaps it was the creatures inhabiting the Never Never, which made my side of reality's big and uglies look like neutered bunnies in comparison. Perhaps it was because of the various sections of the Never Never that reflected some of the darker aspects of human nature, like the demesnes created by ghosts. Perhaps it was the power structures full of beings that seemed so similar to us humans, and yet were so alien that trying to comprehend them would twist your brain into Gordian knots. Personally, I think it was because the Never Never treated the natural laws of our universe not so much as ironclad rules that should always be followed, but rather as guidelines from a concerned friend. Such examples included sudden shifts between vastly different ecosystems, gravity keeping a lax eye of matter, and creatures that upset the food chain in extremely disturbing ways. And then there was the fact that even though it was in late March, and therefore in the firm hands of spring and all things green, I was trekking my way through a blizzard-torn landscape that would make any decent Chicagoite weave such a blanket of obscenities that it would blot out the sun over much of downtown. It didn't help that I was within Winter Court territory, whose leader Mab could freeze helium with barely a thought, and thus the area took extra delight in chilling anything or anyone foolish enough to trespass. With icicles growing from my nose, I wished for nothing more than to be back at my basement dwelling, curled up in front of a roaring fire with my burgeoning Mamadog mouse acting as a big, furry blanket. However, I had a mission to complete, and come hell or high water, I would get it done. Even if my precious package did not exactly share my sentiments. "Papa, are we there yet?" asked a female voice that had that perfect mixture of annoyance and exasperation that only a young woman just inside her volatile teenage years could manifest. I looked over my shoulder and grinned behind my crudely stitched scarf. "What's wrong, kiddo? The morning air too brisk for you?" Puffs of air erupted from her mouth as she sulked, and she crossed her arms. "I'd stick my tongue out at you, but I'm afraid it'd fall off." I shrugged. My victory then. Her lips quirked up the smallest bit. "Meanie." She tucked a stray strand of brown hair back into her wool cap and brushed past me. "Just for that, no side dish for you when I make dinner." I chuckled at her act of rebellion and watched her forge ahead of me. Makoto Kino, now Makoto Kino Dresden, had been my legally adopted daughter going on 5 years now. Ever since I'd saved her from a bunch of marauding supernatural creatures, she'd been my pride and joy through the somewhat tumultuous days of my life. Though considering she'd been the one to fry the goblins attacking her like an overgrown bug zapper, perhaps it would be better to say that she had been a major cause of some of my chaotic adventures. Both raising a kid and a young, foreign girl at that and training a newbie magic user had put quite the strain on my lifestyle, if you could even call it that. There were many times that I had thrown my hands up at the trouble a burgeoning mini-me had brought, and many times that I'd sunk into despair and terror at the thought and occasional reality that someone could harm me through her. But through it all, I had kept her safe, she had grown on me, and I considered her my own, even if we weren't related by blood. The trouble of adopting her was something else altogether, and it was a victory that I consider more difficult and Pyrrhic than I've had with any other villain I've faced. To owe a favor to that man, even if I knew he would never overtly shove it in my face, was a blow to my pride I could never forgive. Still, I had to be grateful that it allowed me to watch over Makoto, no matter how much it tasted like ash in my mouth. Disregarding that, I came to discover the same joy and anxiety that all fathers watching their daughters go through puberty felt. With brown hair pulled into a stylish ponytail, green eyes, and a build similar to my own, Makoto could easily pass as my biological daughter, and growing up had only strengthened those similarities. Puberty had been very kind to Makoto, even though she was mostly Japanese. Her bit of Caucasian heritage granted her a height and build that surpassed even some of her all-American classmates. This made it doubly funny when she grew tall enough to tower over my friend Murphy even though she was barely through middle school. I still wouldn't let the petite cop live it down, and the dislocated shoulder I received when I'd pushed her too hard once was a rather memorable reminder. Still completely worth it. Now, perhaps I should reiterate this. Puberty had been very kind to my daughter. I don't know if it had been the all-American diet of meat and more meat I'd raised her on or her mixed blood or what, but Makoto had gained a curvy quality that made me eye all similarly aged males like they were hungry wolves and she was a lamb dinner. The number of boys I had to beat off her with my staff was far too large for my liking. I guess I should be grateful that Makoto was such an adorable little daddy's girl that she never even noticed. Raising a kid with hero worship was a lot more difficult than advertised, mind you. You'd think that someone who'd hang onto your every word and limbs at times would follow your orders, and for the most part, Makoto did, as long as I was actually watching her. Around me, she was the picture-perfect daughter, sweet, demure, reeking of faux femininity. However, the second she out of my line of sight and earshot she'd transform into a little hellion, causing all sorts of trouble in the name of justice. She became widely known as bane to all bullies, and I became widely known to the school's administration. Who would have guessed that witnessing me throw myself into harm's way on a constant basis for the sake of others while never giving a moment's thought to my own safety would influence her in such a way? My thoughts were interrupted by Makoto's voice cutting through the low wail of the snow. "Don't tell me you're having trouble walking, Papa. You're not old enough yet for your body to break down." There was a short pause, and then she continued on, a teasing quality to her words. "Though you are in your early 30s, and that is pretty ancient." Did I also mention that hanging around me for so long turned her into a bit of a smartass? I gave a deep sigh and trundled up next to her, looping an arm around her shoulder and pulling her face into my chest. "If anything's making me age rapidly, it's having to clean up after your little evil hunting adventures. If I start going gray early, I'm holding you accountable." I could feel her muffled giggles. "Whatever do you mean? I'm just your sweet, little baby girl. I wouldn't do anything that would trouble my papa." Noticeably, she kept her eyes firmly away from my own and focused straight on my chest. There was no need to worry about a soul gaze, the wizardly phenomenon of viewing a person's deepest, most intimate being, as we had already shared one the first time we met, but she was still my daughter, and we both knew that she couldn't hide anything from me, no matter how hard she tried. If this was what my friend Michael Carpenter had to go through with his late-teen Molly, then I had a whole new level of respect for the man, even more so than I already did. And he had another girl ready to enter the breach. Thank heaven for that man's saintly patience. I doubted I could survive another. Makoto wiggled around and snuggled underneath my arm, pulling me closer. She rubbed her hands together and on her face, trying to regain some warmth. The cheer from our bantering subsided a bit, allowing her ire at the cold to settle back in again. Why couldn't I be a pyromancer or something? Be a lot more useful than being a glorified spark plug. Yeah, I agreed. Then you'd be like your old man, setting evil villains ablaze. And the surrounding buildings, she added slyly. And the surrounding buildings, I sagely said. But it wouldn't be our fault. You mean like with Daniel's birthday cake? Images of exploded cream and sugar flowed through my head, and then an advancing and very enraged Charity followed soon afterward. I held back a manly wince at the memory of her tongue lashing, which was shortly followed by the even more manly pastime of passing the buck. I still blame you and Mouse for that debacle. A small smile flitted back on Makoto's face at that, reinforcing the notion that I would forever lose any battle of wits with the fairer. Curse me and my chivalric tendencies. Aside from that, trying to teach Makoto how to use her lightning magic had been slow going. My forte was in the branches of fire, force, and wind magic. Although lightning could be construed as a subsidiary of air, it was still too vague for me to be a solid fountain of wisdom. As far as I could gather, Makoto's powers were based around the collection and redirection of pre-existing electricity. Normally, she could attract and divert outside electrical sources, but if it was truly necessary she could amplify her natural bioelectricity and point it somewhere. The time she used my beloved Blue Beetle as a power source nearly tipped the poor thing over the edge. I think that was the first time I'd ever really regretted trying to teach her how to use her magic. Don't look at me like that. I love that bug. It was a bit strange being both a father and instructor when I couldn't really consider myself an expert in either field, but acting as both had actually managed to polish myself as well. Although Makoto worked in a branch different from my own, the same old tricks that had been drilled into me as a teen learning to use my powers worked just as well, and teaching them to her had made me push myself ahead in my own work and skills. Learning to spot holes or flaws in Makoto's spellslinging made it easier to notice my own, and though I hadn't improved the power of my spells because of the training, it had certainly improved my control and finesse over my more subtle thaumaturgic spells. Sometimes I wondered if I cut myself short at the thought. No, there was no need to dwell on such memories, as enlightening and painful as they were. I needed to forge ahead and create a new path, even if it meant cutting some of the ties I used to hold so dear. I had to, if I wanted to create a safe haven for my daughter. I glanced at Makoto as her nose crinkled up in that way it did when she was annoyed but didn't feel like vocalizing it. She always was a bit sensitive and careful like that, but I don't think I've ever heard of a kid that didn't eventually let loose their heart's misgivings if they felt they were being pushed hard enough. And I did not want a kid who bottled things up inside. I've seen far too often the results of someone who never revealed their desires and hidden emotions until they either blew up or went nuts. So, it looked like I was going to have to do some pushing, Harry style. I ruffled her hair a bit rougher than normal, pushing her cap up and allowing the snow and sleet to pound on her already tender ears. Makoto scowled as she pulled the hat back down, giving me a fierce glare that she had cultivated over many years. I smirked in that all too frustrating way back at her. What's got your panties in a twist, kiddo? You not enjoying the trip? Hey, just because I'd been raising a girl didn't mean I had miraculously started being a lot more tactful. Makoto was much too much of a tomboy for her own good, after all. Makoto cut her eyes away from me immediately and pulled my arm back over her shoulders, hiding a portion of her face from sight. "Nothing, really," I crooned. She glanced back at me and shrugged before hiding her face again. I sighed. "Makoto, 's not fair," she mumbled. Looking back up at me, she took my small nod as permission and began to unload. "It's not fair. Why do I have to stay in Japan? Why can't I stay in Chicago with you and Big Sis and the Carpenters and everyone else I know? I haven't lived in Japan for almost 5 years. I don't know anyone there. I don't want to leave." She shuddered for a moment, and I took the opportunity to pull her closer to me. She looked down, avoiding my gaze, and shook some more. Silly girl, sending Makoto to Japan had become something of a last resort to me. Things were heating up in Chicago, and I did not want my daughter anywhere near the powder keg it was turning into. Especially considering what had occurred just last October. An old archenemy of mine. Hell's bell, did I really just say that? a black court vampire by the name of Mavra, had procured my assistance in finding a text that played a large part in the ritualistic transformation of a person into a death god. Needless to say, in normal circumstances I would have told her to go cram my staff up her withered butt, and in fact I had, but she had press-ganged me into service by threatening one of my closest friends' career. Murphy still didn't know she had almost lost her job, and magic willing, she never would. Regardless, it became clear to me that even though I was pretty safe from most forms of blackmail or threats, my associates weren't. My enemies had hurt my loved ones to hurt me before, and they would do so again, so I had only one choice left to me besides glassing whatever hole those scum crawled up from. I had to remove my loved ones from the equation. Nowhere was this more apparent than with Makoto. The little superhero in her would not hesitate 1 second before jumping into the fray if she thought it was for the greater good or would help me, but I simply couldn't allow her to risk herself, for me or anyone. Perhaps it was selfish, but simply imagining her in the grasp of some of the trash I had fought made me willing to sacrifice anyone else as long as she was safe. So, she had to go, away from me and away from danger. The problem was deciding just where to send her. Murphy was right out. She fell headfirst into danger just as much as I did, so she wouldn't be very good company in that respect. Plus, she had been targeted once already, so that was doubly dangerous. I couldn't burden Michael. His family had already suffered once because of me, and I doubted I would survive the event if something happened to him or his own. Charity would make sure of that. My third choice was actually another reason to ship Makoto off. I had recently come into the knowledge that I had a half-brother on my mother's side, Thomas Wraith. That was awkward enough as it was, but it also turned out that he was a White Court vampire. The White Court sustained their life force by feeding off particular emotions of their victims, and the Wraith family centered around lust. This basically translated to him being an incubus. So leaving a teenage daughter rife with hormones around him was begging for a disaster to happen. Not that I didn't trust Thomas. The man was technically Makoto's uncle, which is something I wish had remained a secret. Unfortunately, I've discovered that trying to keep a secret from an inquisitive child is like trying to stop infrastructure from bursting into flames around me when I'm worked up. Still, there's no way he would have tried anything on her. The same could not be said for Makoto. Daddy's girl or not, Thomas's charm could melt any woman's unmentionables. Considering that he'd recently lost his true love, been exiled from the Wraith family, and unceremoniously dumped into my apartment, the man did not need to be bothered any further. My last choice was my last for a reason. Ebenezer McCoy had been my savior when I was younger. After I had killed Justine Dumorn, my accursed adoptive father and first master in magic, I had been on trial for the crime of killing a human with magic. The 7 laws of magic were very strict. You break one for any reason, and off goes your head. Even though I had killed the man in self-defense, I had still killed him. I had wanted to kill him. The White Council rarely ventured into semantics with rule-breaking. The result was what mattered, not the intent. Had it not been for Ebenezer, I would have just been another bloodstain on a warden's sword. For that, I could never repay that man. He saved me, took me into his home, raised me, and taught me what it was to really use magic, to truly appreciate what it meant to have this wonderful gift. And it was a gift. Magic was the energy of life, the very bonds that kept the universe together. You could do anything with magic, anything at all, but at the same time you had to respect it, to use it for the right reasons. To use it for wrong or selfish ones would taint you, leading you into a downward spiral of depravity with only one end, the sharp, clean end of a blade. So to find out that my savior, my teacher, my friend was the Blackstaff, the wet works man for the White Council, the only person with the privilege to defy the laws of magic with no consequences. It was the greatest betrayal I had ever felt. He had taught me that magic was pure, was clear as the mountain spring, was life itself, and it had all been a lie. He had killed, maimed, twisted, altered, plucked, all for the greater good. He had always been the monster he'd warned me about. When I first found out, I had shunned him, ignored him, denied him. It was all I could do, all I could handle without letting myself fall apart. As time passed, I came to understand who he was. He might not be the white knight I'd idolized him as, but he was still a hero. He did what no other person could do, what no one else wanted to admit was the right thing, even if it wasn't the right way. Even so, I couldn't forgive him, not yet. It was petty, I know, refusing the man who had saved my life, molded me into who I was today, but the wounds still ran deep, and not enough time had passed. Perhaps they would heal, and perhaps they would not, but until then, I would simply have to wait. So, in essence, I was left with my other last choice, shipping Makoto back to her homeland of Japan. It was actually a much easier endeavor than I had initially thought. Since my induction into the Wardens, I had become recognized as something other than the ticking time bomb some of the older and more inflexible members of the White Council thought me as. Instead, I was seen as a bit of celebrity by the fresh-faced newbies being hastily shoved into the ranks thanks to the ongoing war between the Council and the Red Court vampires. Riding a zombie T-Rex to save a bunch of trick-or-treaters from a veritable zombie apocalypse on Halloween can really give you some serious street cred. Thanks to the recently instated Southeast Asia Regional Commander, a young, up-and-coming Japanese native, Makoto would have a safe place to hide and attempt to live a normal life, or as normal as a budding magical girl could be, at least while things cooled down back in Chicago. It especially helped that Japan was firmly in the territory of the secretive Jade Court. Even after hundreds of years, there was almost no information about that last court, except for two things: they liked to stay out of the limelight, and they were extremely territorial. There was no documented case of the red, white, or black courts managing to expand into the area, and the few known cases of some actually trying usually ended with them disappearing under mysterious circumstances. So, considering that I had managed to piss off, one way or another, every other vampire court in existence, I found it doubly reassuring to place Makoto in the one place they would never be stupid enough to try and invade for such a petty reason. Shaking off foreboding thoughts, I tightened my grip around my daughter. It's only for a little while. Just until things settle down back home. She grunted sullenly. I sighed internally. I never was good at comforting, and even with a daughter on my hands, I still never got into the whole gooey, emotional fretting and commiserating thing. So I did what I do best. I poked fun at the situation until she either responded or shocked me into submission. I don't know why you're so disappointed. You'll be back in Japan, home of all that asinine entertainment you love. Think about it. No more having to scrounge around in bootleg stores for those weird backwards comics of yours. No more having to order things through Michael and Charity instead of doing it yourself because you blew out the local library's computer monitor, and you can finally find people who speak that crazy moon language of yours. Makoto was still and silent, but only for a moment. Then she snorted and my arm around her momentarily went numb as she pumped a little static electricity into it. You're a real jerk sometimes, you know that, Papa. Would a jerk be lugging around this armoire you call luggage through frozen tundra when a perfectly healthy young woman could do it herself? I mocked, slightly lifting the large travel bag my daughter had packed for her extended stay. I wasn't joking, either. The ways didn't exactly have car-friendly roads, so any carrying had to be done by hand. Dragging along a basic suitcase with the bare essentials was a tedious experience I hoped to never have to go through again. Already my arm felt like it was going to fall off. Why didn't I send it via airmail? Considering both my and Makoto's experiences with flight, I wouldn't be surprised if her luggage simply vanished into thin air in that metal atrocity called a plane. Pins and needles raced through my arm as she pinched me. A chivalric jerk, yes. Though she was still sniffling, I could definitely see the corners of her lips perking up. Alas, I supposed my niceties towards women defeat me at every turn. This time, she laughed. "You're such a goofball," her giggling tapering off, and she grasped my hand with hers. "You promise to at least visit me every so often. You know, when you're not too busy saving the world." I smiled and leaned over. "Wild outsiders couldn't keep me away, Sparky," I murmured with a peck to her forehead. She murmured something nonsensical in response, and then the two of us fell into relative silence as we continued onward. The uneasiness was still there, but at least it had been diminished for the time being. After a short while, the rocky landscape transformed into something more exotic. Looking around, I noticed that we seemed to have walked into a forest of some type, though it was one of the oddest I'd ever come across, even in the Never Never. There were trees, ferns, shrubs, even flowers, so that wasn't odd. No, what was odd was the fact that they were made completely out of ice. Like glorious ice sculptures crafted by the most obsessive artist in the world, every single work was meticulously cut to represent some form of plant life. Light refracted through their almost alien geometries, casting an ethereal illumination throughout the clearing we were in. Something alighted onto my shoulder, a crisp chill touching my flesh even through the layers of clothing. Picking it up carefully, I was shocked to see it was an icy leaf. There was no organic material within its crystallized form, but its anatomy was almost identical to that of a cherry blossom petal. Slowly, due to the warmth of my body, it melted back into pure water and disappeared. See, this is what freaked me out about the Never Never. As beautiful as this scene was, it violated pretty much all laws of biology and physics, turning a winter wonderland into something out of a sugar-laden Lovecraft novel. Pulling an odd Makoto along with me, I made my way to where the ice blossoms were coming from, a large, crystalline cherry blossom tree. The branches were making a tinkling sound as the wind blew through them, adding to the eldritch feeling of the place. Well, at least now I knew that the Japanese warden had been completely serious and it wasn't a translation error on my part when he said to find where the ice sakura was. Still, this was just odd. In any case, I drew Makoto's attention back to me, startling her out of whatever amazing fantasy she was concocting in her head. She looked dazed for a moment before refocusing, and nodded. I nodded back before placing a hand on the tree's frozen trunk. Apartorum. With that single pseudo-Latin word, I ripped an opening between the Never Never and the real world. Almost like improperly cut fabric, a gap opened where the tree trunk originally was, and I could see through it onto the scene of an idyllic-looking park. Making sure the coast was clear, I stepped through the gap, Makoto following closely behind. Once both of us were out, I spoke again and closed the gap behind us. Almost immediately, I began to sweat, the sheer difference in temperature between Tokyo and the Never Never making itself apparent. I quickly stripped off my winter coat, catching Makoto doing the same out of the corner of my eye. What we were wearing underneath was still a bit too warm for springtime, but it was much more bearable than before. Taking a look around, I took note of where we had emerged. We seemed to be in a section of the nature park the warden had directed us to come out of, right next to a large cherry blossom that overlooked a hill. Luckily, there weren't any trails around us, so we wouldn't have to worry about people becoming alarmed at witnessing us appearing from nowhere. Gathering up my coat and Makoto's luggage, I motioned for her to follow and made my way to the trail so that we could leave the park and get to the apartment complex the warden had set up for us. She quickly caught up, grabbing my arm again and smiling way too adorably to be completely innocent. I rolled my eyes, tilted my head, and dragged her along. It wasn't a perfect beginning to a great idea, but then again, neither were the two of us. Still, it was a beautiful day, my daughter would be safe, and there was only so much trouble she could get into while staying here. All in all, I think everything was looking up. My papa is 20% cooler than everyone else. He's tall, kinda handsome in a rakish way, smooth with the ladies even if half of them either want to kill him or draw him to the dark side, and a great papa. Sure, he can't cook to save his life, flammable objects tend to spontaneously combust in his wake, and he won't wear that awesome hat I got him for his birthday, but he still has one thing going for him that no one else I know has. He's a superhero. No, really, I'm totally serious about this. He's got everything. The powers, the secret base, being part of a large group meant to stop bad guys from taking over the world. Okay, so maybe his costume could use a little work, and he's pretty much beaten the tar out of his secret identity, what with him advertising himself in the phone book and all, but still, he's a superhero and he saves people. I should know. He saved me from a bunch of really creepy monsters that were trying to eat me because I actually managed to survive them crashing a plane. He says that I did most of the work, what with me frying them like I was flinging tasers all over the place, but the fact that he raced halfway across the city to save me just because he wanted to is proof enough of his heroics. And because of that, I really want to follow in his footsteps and learn how to save people using my own special powers. How do you do? I'm Makoto Kino Dresden, hero in training. No missing pet too hard to find. No bully too tough to beat. No electronic device I can't charge, though I might fry it before it reaches full capacity. Finding out you're a veritable magic girl is really cool, and having a bona fide wizard as your dad and mentor makes it even more awesome. He might always be going on about being careful with my powers and to only use them when I absolutely have to, but I've seen Papa whip out his wand and blast a baddie without even thinking about it, and if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. Of course, I'm not so dumb as to outright disobey him and his rules. I've seen what happens when you just jump into problems without having either the preparation or the intelligence to fight your way out. I see it every time Papa takes off his glove to do his daily exercises with the smoked remains of what used to be his hand. You might have magic to back you up, but it's nothing more than a skill set. There's no one thing that can fix every problem you come across. Sometimes that nail you see might just rebound into your face if you hit it with your hammer. In any case, my papa was still the best. He could use magic, he'd saved oodles of people, the city of Chicago, and probably the world on several occasions, and he still managed to set aside enough time and energy to raise an orphan like me. I know he sacrificed a lot so that he could legally adopt me, especially now that I'm older and I've seen the type of people he's dealt with, so there's no way I can't listen to what he says when I know he's just trying to do what's best for me. Still, that doesn't mean I can turn a blind eye to injustice around me. If I see wrongs happening right in front of me, I have to do something about it. Just like the heroes in the comics and cartoons Papa's always teasing me about. I don't care what he says. Defeat can totally lead to friendship if you just try hard enough. It just hasn't happened to me yet. You'd think people would be impressed by your ability to dropkick a jerk off the monkey bars when he's shaking kids down for their lunch money, but no, you get sent to the principal's office about how that's dangerous, and not appropriate for a young lady your age, and bones aren't meant to bend that way. Even with all the trouble I might have caused, and I still say it was in the name of justice, I was still reluctant to move back to Japan. I knew of the danger Papa was afraid of. Hell's bells, I'd seen some of the horrors he fought and had been on the receiving end of 1 or 2 or 3 of them. But it was still my home, even if I'd only spent a third of my life there. I'd made friends, had a new family, found new people to learn from and live with and love. Even if it was only temporary, I didn't want to leave them all behind. Plus, my Japanese was pretty rusty from not being around the language 24/7, and I was not looking forward to trying to decipher all the new kanji I'd invariably come across, I'd barely started learning them when I left Japan. Still, I was in Japan now, and I had to make the most of it. And at least Papa would stay with me long enough to get me settled in and make sure I was 100% safe, the paranoid dope. My first morning back in Tokyo started like any other. I hit the switch to my wind-up alarm clock just as it started ringing, rose groggily out of the futon, and gave a muffled yawn. It would take a little longer to get my internal clock used to the new time zone, but I was always good at getting up. Changing sleep schedules before we left helped, as well. Making sure not to wake Papa up, I padded across the small family unit apartment, curling my toes appreciatively at the feeling of tatami mats under my soles. I'd always enjoyed the tightly woven texture, and having the chance to do so again after so long made me sink into sweet nostalgia. The apartment the warden had set up for us was a one-room mansion located in a small apartment complex in the Azabu-Juban neighborhood of Tokyo. It was small and cozy and, I was happy to note, very low-tech. As was much of the rest of the neighborhood, funnily enough. I loved how people back in Chicago thought that Japan was some huge tech giant, with high-tech gadgets in every house and everything being automated. That couldn't be further from the truth. Although Japan was a huge exporter of electronic goods, it actually wasn't all that big on technology in the common household. Leave that to electric meccas like Shinjuku and Akihabara. Even when I was young and still living with my biological parents, the fanciest piece of machinery we had was our AC unit. So it was pretty easy to transition to an actual icebox and wood-burning stove, even if that brought a whole different mess of problems and it made it hard to get Papa to start eating home-cooked meals instead of dining out at Old Man Mac's all the time, even if he did make a really good steak. Still, I learned, and today would be no different. I even woke up extra early so that I could make both breakfast and a bento for each of us. I had a gas burner, a rice cooker, all the cooking utensils I wanted, and a full icebox, all courtesy of that nice regional warden. Setting the rice to cook, I got started on the rest of the meal. The classic breakfast was eggs over easy with soy sauce, rice, miso soup, and a small salad. All tasty and neat and healthy. Papa really was over-reliant on cheap fast food, and while it was okay to eat, it wasn't healthy at all. Even though Papa had started running, usually as the result of a horrific abomination trying to eat him, that still wasn't enough to offset his daily calorie intake thanks to those fried meals of lard. If there was one thing I didn't want, it was a tubby Papa. As I went into autopilot, cooking and mixing and adding and tasting, my mind went back to when Papa first adopted me. I was scared and lonely and had no one to turn to. My parents were my only relatives, being only children themselves and their own parents long since gone, and I was left in a foreign land with the sudden knowledge that I could shoot lightning bolts from my hands. I was terrified, to say the least. And then Papa came dashing in like a Super Sentai and fixed all my problems. Well, he tried to anyway. He wasn't exactly the smoothest operator when it came to child rearing, but he did his best and I have close to zero complaints. I still think he should make me his sidekick in crime fighting, though. Also, there were so many things I still didn't know about Papa. Kinda weird, since I saw directly into his very soul when we first met, that whole magical soul gaze thingy and all. And whenever I wanted to learn what he was doing I could always ask Babu, but some things would always be hidden. And there were certainly some new things since he adopted me that I still didn't quite get. Placing breakfast onto the low table, I silently walked back over to where Papa was still asleep. He always had bad sleeping posture, and this morning was no exception. His arms were flung about, his legs tangled in his sheets, his mouth wide open yet not snoring. Not very dignified, Papa. How could a man that was so open when he was asleep be able to keep so many secrets? Like, when did he learn to speak Japanese so well? Just last month. He could only hold a basic conversation using polite language, and his accent was atrocious. Even after making it his own personal crusade to learn Japanese well enough so that I could keep a part of my heritage with me, he sounded like, well, like how a Japanese person trying to sound like an American trying to speak Japanese sounds, really silly. So I was expecting to be all kinds of embarrassed when we made contact with the apartment manager as he stumbled over the words, but he took me completely by surprise by not only speaking the language perfectly, but almost erasing his American accent as well. What, was there some kind of translation magic I wasn't aware of? And if there was, why hadn't he ever told me? Was he just waiting to see my slack-jawed expression? Oh wait, this was Papa, of course he was. Pursing my lips, I looked down at the sleeping man. Men who made their daughters look like idiots needed to be punished. Deciding on that course of action, I pinched his nose. It took a couple seconds, but then he started to sputter in his sleep, jolted once, and then opened his eyes. By the time he was awake, however, I had already removed my hand and was sitting at attention, Caesar style, a good foot from him. I beamed, closing my eyes, and hoping that the smile I wore didn't betray the actual source of my mirth. Morning, Papa, he let out a short, punctuated snort. Morning, kiddo. Sitting up carefully and crossing his legs, he shot a hand out and ruffled my hair a bit more forcefully than normal. How'd you sleep? Fine. You? Fine. Right up until I stopped being able to breathe. Keep eye contact. Don't look away. That's how you lose. Really. I kept my tone as neutral and innocent as possible. Maybe it was ghosts. What? Ghosts were real. Right. Ghosts. He kept his eyes leveled on me for another impossibly long second before snorting again and removing his hand. So, what's for breakfast? I smiled brightly and led him over to the low table before setting out the meal in front of us. With a short rendition of, "Let's eat," which I know Papa totally slaughtered on purpose considering it's been a ritual since he took me in, we dug into the meal I prepared. I was pleased to note that the quality of the meal was a bit higher than usual. Guess food prepared from the same place the ingredients came from tastes better. Or maybe that was just whimsical thinking. Papa was no help in that regard. He simply ate his food like a man, complimenting me on my improving skills like he always did. I couldn't help but feel myself blush at his brusque but affectionate comments. I knew I was pretty much a hopeless tomboy, but I did want to be my papa's little princess even if he knew my true self. Cooking was a fun and feminine hobby, and it made me proud to note that I was pretty much the only real feminine influence in Papa's life, no offense to Big Sis or Auntie Charity. I giggled at the few bits of rice clinging to his scruffy chin, and he looked at me with a bewildered expression before I plucked them off. Papa rolled his eyes and rubbed his cheek with his sleeve before returning to his meal. We sat and ate in comfortable silence before Papa broke it. "So, you ready to transfer into your new school?" "I guess." I shrugged. "It's definitely going to be awkward." "Not as much as you think, probably. You're not transferring in the middle of the year, after all." He smirked, giving that roguish smile that I knew made female friends and foes alike want to simultaneously swoon and punch him in the face. "You can thank this country's messed up school year for that." He chuckled roughly. "What kinda education system makes the students come to a new school right before summer break? It's like they're asking the kids to play hooky." I quirked an eyebrow. "We aren't all juvenile delinquents like you were at my age, Papa." I wasn't a juvenile delinquent. I simply had a legacy of misspent youth. He grumbled at my short burst of giggling, his face contorted in the most adorable way. Papa would never admit to it, but he was so cute when he was embarrassed. Like a puppy who had just taken its chew toy taken from it. He cleared his throat in an attempt to sidetrack the conversation. "What about your uniform? You gonna be okay wearing your old track suit?" It was my turn to frown cutely and grumble. I don't know what the problem was with Japan, but why was everyone so short? Sure, the average height of the Japanese population had increased over the last century, but I still felt like I was a hulking brute compared to other girls my age. I was never really that troubled by it back in Chicago. While still one of the tallest girls in my class, I wasn't the tallest and I didn't exactly tower over most of the rest. But I suddenly felt super awkward when I was walking with Papa on the way to the apartment and all these little, kawaii girlies passed by me, so petite and slender that I knew they would trip any guy's protect instincts in an instant. Not that I was rushing to find a guy to protect me, I could take care of myself, thank you very much, and I had Papa. No guy anywhere near my age could even hold a candle to him. Kinda hard to find an interesting boy when they all paled in comparison to the super awesomeness that was my Papa. Still, it irked me that, because of my larger than average stature, there weren't any school uniforms that fit me. The standard ones were several sizes too small for me, so we couldn't just grab one off the rack at a store. If I wanted one, we'd have to get one custom ordered. I wasn't really looking forward to that. Luckily, with the help of the regional warden, I had gotten permission to simply wear a track suit while at school. Even better, I could quickly order some of the male-sized uniforms and wear those once I got more settled in. Of course, that would just make me stick like an even sore thumb, and I did not relish that thought. As long gone as I'd been from Japan, I still remembered the old motto of, "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down." I knew I was gonna catch enough flack just because of my personality, probably wouldn't help to stand out visually, as well. Papa must have noticed my discomfort, because he followed up his question with his usual method of diffusing tension, acting like a goober. I yelped when something splatted on my face. Finally focusing back on the present, I saw that he had flicked some grains of rice at me, a shit-eating grin plastered across his face. "You with me again, Sparky." I pulled off the grains and ate them, sticking out my tongue when I was finished. "You should know better than to waste food," I said with a mock sternness. "There are starving children in China." His grin grew. "That's something only adults are allowed to say. Not if the adult is the one being fed by the child." Touché. There was a brief pause, and then he flicked a few more grains at me. I sputtered at his bluntness before making a counterattack. Soon, pieces of food were flying back and forth across the table as we used our chopsticks to launch whatever scraps and crumbs were left over from the main meal. It was going to be a nightmare to clean up, especially if the food got ground into the tatami mats, but I doubted Presentus were giving that any consideration, given the all-out food fight we had devolved into. Soon, the exchange of scraps slowed, the two of us panting softly, not from exhaustion, but simply from laughing too hard at the sheer lunacy and silliness we had fallen into. Both of us were splotched with random bits of food and it was going to take some extra hard scrubbing to get the egg yolk out of Papa's shirt, but the atmosphere had regained its levity, even if the cause had been so very, very stupid. "Feeling better?" Papa asked. I nodded, and his grin tilted into something softer. "Good." He reached across the table and removed a piece of bread that had lodged itself in my bangs. "I know it's hard, kiddo, but I also know you're gonna be just fine here. No kid of Harry Dresden's is going to let something as stupid as a dress code get her down." I sighed in hopeless exasperation. Trust Papa to cheer me up with a spontaneous breakfast battle. Papa continued to pick pieces of food off of me as he talked. "It'll only be for so long, and this is as safe a place for you I can find. Besides, it'll be healthy for you to get some reunion time with your home culture." He tweaked my nose, and I sniffed back a snort. "Just don't go crazy on me. Don't want to come back and find out my daughter has become a gang leader while I was gone." I did snort at that. "I think you've been reading some of my manga behind my back." He gave me a subdued smirk as he finished cleaning the debris from our culinary battle off of me. I rolled my shoulders and began to return the favor, sweeping my hands across his shoulder and chest to get rid of food. Besides, I doubt I'd be a good one. Too much kanji involved. You're certainly better than me on that subject. All three of your written languages look like a kid got into an inkpot and scribbled out random symbols. Oh no, he wasn't gonna get away with that kind of thing so easily. No way was I gonna let him brush off his sudden mastery of the language in less time than it took a native speaker to relearn basic grammar. You're just too lazy to try and remember anything beyond your silly American language. Hey, I live in America, so that's all I need to know. You do realize that American is a dialect of English, right? Don't point out my mistakes in basic language skills with your silly logic. He trailed off when he noticed the smug look on my face. What, you look like you just pulled one off on your old man. He glanced at himself briefly. Did you do something to me when I wasn't looking? Well, nothing physical at least. I had, however, managed to trick him into revealing something. During our silly conversation, I'd slipped into using Japanese in the middle of a sentence. Without missing a beat, Papa had continued to talk, in Japanese himself. I now knew that there was some magical tomfoolery afoot. There was no way Papa was smart enough to just shift into a different language without even noticing what he'd done, especially through mundane means. Papa frowned. Seriously, Makoto, that grin of yours is starting to. He stopped for a moment, his eyes rolling to the top left. He said nothing for a few moments and then heaved a great, annoyed sigh. I'm not talking American, am I? If it was possible for my shit-eating grin to get bigger, it would have consumed my face just from that realization alone. He grumbled and brushed off his shoulder. You're starting to get too clever for your own good. Pretty soon I'm going to have to chain you to your bed so you don't start sneaking out at night for vigilante activities. I wasn't that stupid. Papa was way too light a sleeper for me to even try to sneak out of that old, noisy apartment. Besides, Mouse would just pick me up and drag me back to bed before pinning me to the mattress with his shaggy mass. He was getting big, so I leaned forward, switching back to English. Will you tell me how you jumped from being largely incompetent in Japanese to a sudden grandmaster? If it had something to do with Babu, I was so gonna bribe that horny skull with all the 18+ doujinshi I could get my hands on until he spilled all the awesome secrets in his vast library of knowledge. Papa picked up his cup of green tea, something I'd been hammering into his palate, and took a long pull. He closed his eyes and hummed thoughtfully. Ancient wizarding secret. My grin drooped into an annoyed frown. I'm 14. Everything is an ancient wizarding secret to me. Papa opened one eye very briefly and stared at me. The corner of his lip quirked up. So it is. I pouted, not being able to help myself. I'm not gonna get anything more out of you, am I? You are wise beyond your years, grasshopper. He took another long, drawn out, and rather noisy sip. Not too wise, though. I folded my arms and looked away, my pout growing. Okay. So that road of attack had failed, but at least I'd gotten some information out of it. As soon I got home, I was gonna grab Babu and hold him hostage until I plucked every last bit of info from him. Wow, I sounded like a really cliché after-school villain there. This was bothering me a lot more than I'd thought. My thoughts were broken by another long slurp from Papa drinking his tea. Facing him again, I saw that my shit-eating grin had transferred onto him. I just grumbled in the face of my surrender and went back to finishing off breakfast. Papa returned to his as well. The two of us finished breakfast, chatting about random things as we're wont to do, particularly about what we had planned for the day. While I went to my first day at a new school, Papa would go to visit the warden and examine the safe house I was going to live in during my stay in Japan. Knowing him, He would examine every nook and cranny and probably set up a dozen more wards on top of what was already there just to make sure nothing could get at me. I really loved my papa, but he could be a bit twitchy at times. With the both of us dressed, me in my track suit and papa in his customary duster and carrying his whacking stick, we made our way out of the apartment and into the fresh spring air of the surrounding neighborhood. The apartment was located in a lesser traveled area of the Juban district, so there wasn't much traffic aside from the two of us. It was nice and peaceful, and spoke of good fortune for the rest of the day. Rarely did Papa and I get to just walk around without the constant worry that we were about to be assaulted by some random never creature or the like. Okay, maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration, but once you get ambushed by one animal of mystical background you tend to be wary of the next. We still get jumpy whenever parent-teacher night comes around. We continued on in pointless conversation, him teasing me about all of Japan's strange idiosyncrasies that I knew he only learned just for that purpose, and me taking it all in stride like a good daughter would, nodding or making small noises of assent as his expressions grew more comical. I got my revenge, though. When the two of were about to part ways, I swung my arms around Papa's neck and, before he could even react, planted the biggest, sloppiest kiss I could on his cheek. An older Japanese woman caught the scene and made a few choice disparaging remarks, stomping off in a huff. The blush and pinched look on Papa's face was completely worth all the teasing he'd dished out, and I just laughed before waving and running off. He should be relieved that's all I did as payback. It was only a couple of years ago that I had stopped announcing to everyone with complete sincerity that I was going to be Papa's bride. Saving a girl and then raising her as your own tends to have a large impact, especially when the girl was in the throes of white knight syndrome. Kissing Papa in public was a good several steps down from the total Electra complex I was rocking back then. Fun side fact. That was also around the time The Tale of Genji was banned from our house and Babu was locked inside a stainless steel box for about a week. Let's just say that the two were related and leave it at that. Now that putting Papa in his place was in order, it was time to make a good first impression at my new school. I still was of the belief that staying in Japan was stupid, but Papa only wanted what was best for me, so I couldn't argue too much. I just had to prove capable of taking care of myself, and maybe Papa would put me on probation and take me home early. I pumped my fists in front of me and nodded. Yeah, that would absolutely work. Now, all I had to do was find a way to prove myself and I would be on the fast track back home where all the real fun was. It was at that point that Lady Luck threw me a fat ball down the middle. As I turned a corner, I came across a scene that nearly made me rub my eyes to make sure I wasn't just seeing things. Blinking, I realized that, yes, this was actually happening. A young Japanese girl in a sailor fuku, probably around the same age as me, had dashed around a corner and smacked right into a trio of men who I could only describe as delinquency personified. Bright, flashy clothing, check. Hairdos that were dumb back in the 80s. Check. Language skills that made Papa, well, past Papa, sound like a professor. Check. The girl had ran full tilt into the smallest one and immediately bounced backwards, falling on her butt in the girliest manner possible. The delinquent she'd run into took one step back, then crashed to the ground like a wrecking ball had hit him instead of a girl that was probably only 90 pounds soaking wet. He immediately started screaming as though all his bones had snapped at once while his shifty friends began to accost the poor teen. I knew a shakedown when I saw one. It happened often enough in Chicago, though not as blatant and not nearly as amateurish. And the bullies there certainly didn't pick on kids who were barely half their size and looked as defenseless as a bunny. There were too many people who would be perfectly willing to kick their asses if they tried it. Like me. Well, good fortune was staring me right in the face, and there was no way I was going to let it get away from me, for both my sake and the girls. Justice mode unlocked. Heaving myself onto the ledge next to me, I got a much better view of the situation. Also, it made what I was about to do a whole lot easier and cooler. With a quick burst of speed, I rushed along the ledge before launching myself off it, foot extended forward and my classic battle cry bursting from my lips. Dynamic entry. There was a squawk of surprise and pain when my foot made contact with the rear of the delinquent looming over the girl. He went flying forward, smacking the ground and sliding a good couple feet. There was a pregnant pause before the other two guys whirled on me with flabbergasted looks of anger and shock. The hell was that? The shock may have also been because I had to scramble back to my feet after falling onto my butt from the drop kick. The movies made it seem way easier. I smirked and rubbed a thumb under my nose. Okay, so Papa said it was always best to try and scare away possible danger before actually engaging it in a fight, but these were normal, vanilla humans, and I'm pretty damn sure I could easily take them in a fight without having to worry about them being grim fairy tale creatures in disguise. Besides, it felt really satisfying to give that one jerk a boot in the butt. As much as Papa would grumble if he saw it, I knew he'd agree with me even if he'd never say it out loud. Of course, what I did next would most likely result in both a grounding and dope slap to the back of the head if he ever found out. What kinda men are you, picking on a little girl like that? All she did was bump into you and you gang up on her like that. I formed my hand into a thumbs down and stuck out my tongue. As long as justice lives, I'll never let jerks like you get away with crimes like that. And who da the hell are ya to tell us what ta do? I grinned. Just a justice-loving gal with superheroing as a hobby. Oh stars and stones, monologuing. If there was one thing Papa hated more than a needless fight, it was monologuing. Papa said it was the sort of thing that only belonged in comic books, and that people who did it were much too full of themselves. But it was just so fun. Oh well, what Papa didn't know wouldn't hurt him. My awesome speech must have riled up the remaining two delinquents even more than my surprise flying kick, because the largest of them, a specimen that was the living embodiment of steroids, took the opportunity to advance on me. Roid Rage sneered nastily. You should leave the heroics ta big guys, little girly. Ya might get hurt otherwise. He punctuated his threat by cracking his knuckles all at once. My smile grew larger, the excitement from the situation almost heady. Spoken like a true small fry. The dark amusement from Royd's eyes dropped instantly, replaced by something simpler, base anger. Why you? He raised a fist and threw a haymaker. Too easy. Royd obviously had no training because he overextended himself, throwing his shoulder too far in with his wild swing. It was child's play to kick his forward leg out from underneath him and add a smack to the back of his head for good measure. The sudden spin in his balance caused him to crash face first into the cement. I planted my foot on the center of his back and pushed down, easily keeping him pinned despite him probably having 100 or so pounds on me. Did I mention I have superhuman strength and endurance? No, because I do, and it's awesome as hell. Papa said it might have something to do with my electromancy powers and that I might be supercharging my muscles so that they had more tensile strength, or whatever it was that made me able to crack a cinder block in half at age 10. He wasn't quite certain, though, and made it a point not to try and test the limits of my improved abilities. I certainly had, though. Papa never quite forgave me for the time I jumped off the carpenter's garage trying to prove I could fly, even though I ended up only breaking their fancy bird bath instead of my bones. Once that ability had been discovered, though, Papa made sure I could protect myself via more mundane means. At first I wanted to learn karate so I could be a martial arts master that could blast lightning, but he had this mental image of me punching a plug out of an unsuspecting mugger and turned me over to Big Sis instead. She insisted that I learn a softer form of fighting instead of impact arts. At first I was hesitant to learn Aikido, 'cause it looked like a wimpy alternative to the Karate Kid's crane kick. But when I became a witness to her flipping a dude twice her size and 3 times her weight with the grace of a dancer and the effort of lifting chopsticks, I became instantly enamored. But back to the present. With 2 of the 3 stooges out of commission, the last one, Mr. Whiny, took one look at me before dashing off like a whipped dog. Huh, guess he hadn't hurt his leg all that badly after all. I took the chance to look over the girl I'd just saved and had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. Oh stars and stones, that hair. Her blonde strands were split into 2 waist-length tails, with 2 clumps near her scalp. Who told her that was a good fashion choice? It didn't look good, it just made me hungry for the carpenter's Italian night. I bit the inside of my cheek, hoping that the mirth deep inside wouldn't escape, and opened my mouth. You okay? They didn't rough you up too bad, did they? The girl gulped and shook her head side to side frantically. No, she squeaked, her high-pitched voice almost grating on the ears. You saved me. Thanks so much. My smile melted into something softer. That's good. I turned around and waved a hand over my shoulder. Try not to get into any more trouble, Kay. A small cry of, "Al, all right," came from behind me, and I had to prevent myself from squealing in delight. Had to keep my cool look, right? Jogging back to where I'd left my bag, I grabbed it and made my way back to the route that would bring me to Juban High. Today had started out great. I had a good breakfast with Papa, got the last word in on him, and saved an innocent citizen while looking badass in the process. The sky was clear, I had a fresh start, and things were moving a fine direction. Things were really looking up today. Things were not looking up today. I sighed as I dug into my lunch. Sitting underneath a tree in the school's courtyard. Alone. I don't think I made all that good of an impression on the rest of the students and faculty, hence my isolation during lunchtime. I thought my self-introduction to my homeroom was pretty well done, though maybe I shouldn't have announced my availability to fix any violations of justice. Or maybe it was when I told my classmates that Papa's job was wizard for hire, that I put everyone off. Or maybe it was when I was approached by that overly friendly and touchy-feely member of the soccer club and ended up tossing him 10 feet down the hall when his hands got a little too ambitious. Whatever it was, I now had rumors about me flying all over the school, and students who had once been crowding around me to learn more were now avoiding me like I had some contagious disease. There were rumors that I was a gang leader, that I had been expelled from my old school for fighting, that I had some sort of sickness caught in the 8th grade. There were even rumors that Papa had ties to the mafia and I was sent here to avoid some violent turf war happening back in trigger-happy America. How dare they say that Papa had ties to? How dare they say Papa was friendly with the mob? He was cordial at best, and more prone to socking a gentleman in the gut than shaking his hand. And it's not like they had any proof, anyway. Another sigh escaped from my lips. I really did want to have a somewhat normal life here, but it looked like my personality had gotten the best of me and messed that up something fierce. I wasn't really forward to a full year of being avoided or, at best, politely ignored. But it wasn't like I was going to live in this place forever, so I just had to take it on the chin and push forward. At least the courtyard was a nice place to eat, so that wasn't so bad. A small spark tickled the back of my brain. I rolled my eyes and raised my voice. If you're trying to peep, you're not doing a very good job at it. There was a small squeak of surprise in the bush behind me. Probably as another side effect of my powers, I could vaguely detect other people around me. I think it had something to do with my body resonating with the innate bioelectricity of other living beings, but whatever it was, I had the equivalent of a natural radar system in my head. It wasn't that powerful. I couldn't differentiate between electrical sources, and it was only really useful when there were only few people around or it would all sort of blend together and lose its effectiveness. but it gave me a killer advantage when people tried to sneak up on me, and I never lost when I was at hide and seek. Which is probably why they stopped letting me be it years ago. You can come out, you know. I don't bite. There was awkward laughter, and then out popped the same girl I'd rescued this morning. My eyes widened in surprise. Oh, it's you. I didn't know you went to this school. I hadn't really paid any attention to the uniform she was wearing, but it was clear now that she had the same white, blue, and red fuku that the other female students had on. Did you get to school without any more trouble? She put a hand behind her head and giggled cutely. Yes. Thank you again. Ah. I'm Usagi Sakino. Makoto Dresden. I know. I heard all about you in school. Ah. I mean. She swallowed at my raised eyebrow. Yeah. I knew what she meant. Still, I felt a bit disappointed that the rumors were so prevalent. My dark thoughts were banished when she waved her hands frantically in front of her. It's not like I believe any of them. I really do think you're a hero. You saved me, after all. At that, a bit of flush rose in my cheeks. Oh gods, I wanted to squeeze her so bad when she said that. I don't know what it is about Japanese schoolgirl uniforms, but everything about them made female students into little cuddle magnets. Oh, thank you. I blinked and shooched over to the side. Do you want to join me? Her face blossomed into a sunny smile. Sure. She quickly filled in the spot I had opened and plopped her lunch bag in her lap. I turned back to my food, but it wasn't long before I noticed her staring intently at my lunch, a bit of drool leaking from the corner of her mouth. I smiled weakly and offered her the box. Would you like a bite? She jumped slightly and giggled nervously. Ah, I really don't eat that much, but if you insist. With speed almost too quick for me to see, Usagi grabbed a rice ball and shoved nearly the whole thing into her mouth, muttering a muffled, "Thanks for the food." I blinked again. A sly grin worked its way to my face. With the way she was chowing down on that rice ball, I very much doubted she was the kind of girl that watched what she ate. She must have had one heck of a metabolism to keep her petite figure despite her voracious eating. Although I did notice a bit of a chub around her waist, and her face was rounded than I'd first thought. I was almost jealous of her small stature. I looked down at myself, and then at her again. My smirk became more pronounced. Almost jealous. I'm glad you like it. I'm pretty proud of my cooking. Mako. Ah, I'm sorry, I can call you Mako, right? I smiled at the cute nickname, pausing only for a moment when I saw that she had speared one of my side dishes with her fork without me noticing. When had she? I sighed internally. Didn't eat that much, my butt. You cooked all of this on your own. I nodded and popped a small rolled egg omelet into my mouth. My papa's not very good at cooking, so if I hadn't learned we would have eaten nothing but takeout most of the time. Usagi bounced up and down. Well, you're really good at it. Maybe you can teach me. Or, maybe you could just make me a bento instead. She leaned over and rubbed her head into my shoulder like a cat would, that same empty, happy smile plastered all over her face. I couldn't help but laugh. Okay, so maybe she was a bit ditzy, kinda flaky, and had the eating habits of Mouse, but she was also good-natured, friendly, and as cute as her namesake. It couldn't hurt to get closer to her, especially as she was the only one thus far to not avoid my gaze whenever I entered a room. Though from what I'd seen, I had a feeling that Usagi wouldn't mind talking to a slobbering troll as long as it fed her. As we moved on to aimless chattering, I thought that maybe this whole Japan thing wasn't such a bad idea after all. I had a new home, a new school, and, most importantly, a new friend. Yup, I think my time in Tokyo was going to be a fun time after all. Iritus. Well, poo on that then. See you next time. Expect more collateral damage goodness in the next episode of Senshi Files. Parents just don't get enough appreciation for all the work they do. They cook, clean, educate, protect, love, and raise their children for no reason other than wanting them to grow up healthy and happy. Often, it's a thankless job, with the children not caring about all the trouble they put their parents through. Temper tantrums, teenage rebellion, whining, disobeying rules, demanding things they can't or shouldn't have, parent-teacher conferences, even calls from the local police. Each of these is an obstacle which makes it so much harder than it needs to be for a parent to make their child's life productive and beneficial. My mother died shortly after giving birth to me, and my father died when I was still a kid. I don't know how good a mom mine might have been, but I'm certain that my dad was the best he could have possibly been given our circumstances. We might have moved around a lot, and it certainly wasn't easy, but he still tried and it showed. I lived, I learned, and I'm still here today. It was hard, but I'm sure that almost any parent can say that it was worth it. At the moment, though, I was having problems thinking on the positive side while also being confronted by a police officer for being suspicious. Again, suspicious here means that I was obviously foreign and was wearing an outfit that belonged more in a film noir flick than out on the street with the normal people. Hooray for having to deal with xenophobic people thanks to my darling daughter. She was going to get snarked at so badly when I saw her again, both for unintentionally forcing me into situations like this and for that little prank she pulled when we separated earlier in the morning. My frustration must have shown on my face because the policeman frowned and narrowed his eyes at me. "And what, exactly, are you doing here again?" I somehow resisted the urge to roll my eyes, though it was a close call. I had been talking to the man for the past 10 or so minutes, explaining where I was going and that no, I wasn't going to cause any trouble. I threw him off a bit when I responded to his choppy English with my nearly flawless Japanese, but I honestly think that just frazzled him even more. The big, dumb American was not supposed to be speaking their language. All right, maybe I was being a bit hard on the man, but I had very little patience for people who automatically assumed the worst about others with no real basis other than cultural belief and gossip. I got enough of that from the members of the White Council who assumed I was just a dark wizard bomb, waiting to explode and shatter all the laws of magic at a moment's notice. It didn't help that the officer had basically taken one look at me as I was looking over the directions to my destination and had immediately pulled me off the sidewalk to have a chat. It's funny, but I didn't know chat and interrogation were interchangeable. I sighed, for what must have been the 5th time in this conversation alone, and scratched the back of my head. Look, I'm just trying to find a coworker's home to discuss a business transaction we're working on. The officer crossed his arms. A coworker, you say? Funny, I didn't know we had many foreign businesses in the neighborhood. I bit my tongue at the caustic remark about to escape and swallowed it back. It's an international firm. I'm from the Central USA branch, and he's from Japan's. Well, that was true enough. Though I doubted most people would consider the world's magical government to be a business of any sort. His eyes roamed over my duster. Rather informal clothing for such a big-sounding firm. We love our casual Fridays, I said. He set his jaw at that. Ha, current score. Me. 1, racist jerk. 0. Let me look at that address again. I handed over the slip of paper with the safehouse's address. It's not like I was really trying to keep the place a secret. There was nothing special about the place. It was just a smallish, older apartment complex in the residential district. There was nothing out of the ordinary about it. Well, unless you counted the people who live there. Though I doubt he could find a reason to arrest magic users beyond the whole magic doesn't exist, so some kind of fraud must be involved idea. The officer looked over the address meticulously, as if trying to will into existence some form of wrongdoing that he could pin on me, but unless he could spontaneously change the numbers and letters on the paper to some kind of launch code for a nuclear weapon, he wasn't going to find anything. When he didn't discover evidence of nefarious intent, he reluctantly handed it back with an almost inaudible grumble. So, I tried. I really did, but I couldn't help myself. A smirk made its way to my face and my tone took on a hint of a lilt. Anything else I can do for you? Anything else you need to ask? I could almost hear his teeth grinding at the smug sound of my voice. No, that will be all. Enjoy your stay here, and I hope your meeting goes as planned. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you, officer. Before he could get the last word in, I spun around and walked off, my long gait quickly leaving him behind in the crowd of people. You seem rather pleased with yourself. I jumped at the sudden voice and feeling of someone entwining an arm with mine. I instinctively turned to look where both had come from, and my self-satisfied countenance immediately began to slip. Where before there had been no one, there was now an extremely beautiful blonde woman wearing a Greco-Roman toga and looking at me with an extremely amused cant to her eyes. No, some random cosplayer had not just grabbed me out of the blue. What was currently holding onto me like it was the most natural thing in the world was much, much more terrible and insidious than that. What do you want, Lassile? I asked. The venom I put in her name could kill a basilisk. She pursed her lips. On her face, it was more than a little cute, making her seem like the girl next door who had just been turned down for milkshakes. For anyone else, it would have been a natural reaction. For her, it was completely artificial. Can I not just have a friendly conversation with you, my host? Sorry, I said. I'm all out of friendly when it comes to fallen angels trying to buy my soul. Lassile, aka the seducer, aka the temptress, aka the webweaver, aka the hallucination that wouldn't leave, was a bona fide, black as pitch, fallen from grace, end of days, former angel. One of the original that had rebelled against God and had been cast down as punishment. She was part of an organization of fallen angels known as the Order of the Blackened Denarius that were bound to 30 silver coins, possibly the very same coins which Judas Iscariot had betrayed the Son of God for. The Denarians were beings that sought to bond with human hosts in order to have an actual existence outside of a cut and imprinted piece of metal. The benefits were incredible, beyond human comprehension: ancient knowledge, functional immortality, improved physiology, supernatural powers, even the ability to transform into a literal hellspawn to rend your foe's flesh from bone. The payment? Just a small, minuscule thing, a timeshare on your soul. For every boost you get, that timeshare grows, until you're more demon than man and your vacation is more lake of sulfur than the Bahamas. I had come across the Denarians before, and it was not an event I wanted to relive. Their ultimate goal was to cause as much suffering and pain as possible, and as someone whose job is to fight against people like that, we didn't exactly get along that well. The fact that they had tortured me and then killed a man much better than I by using me as bait also failed to endear me to them much. So why did I have a fallen angel taking up space in the vast, empty corridors of my brain? Well, it wasn't really all that intentional. And I hadn't quite reached the point where I'd sell my soul for a few impressive parlor tricks. Being sneaky, backhanded, and altogether hateful bastards, the Denarians had tricked me into making contact with one of their silver soul prisons, the Denarius. I'm sure I could have handled the situation better, but when you're faced with either you grabbing the hell coin or letting the youngest son of your best friend do so, you tend not to think about consequences and snatch that up before a very young, very innocent, very impressionable, and very grabby kid does. Of course, the first thing I did after that was bury the thing under several dozen pounds of concrete in my sub-cellar so that it would take a chisel, jackhammer, and 5 pounds of dynamite to unearth it. Unfortunately, the small bit of contact I had made was enough for the real Lassile to photocopy a shadow of herself into my mind. Copy Lassile couldn't do much to me other than the classic Faustian temptation, but her ability to appear before me, create any illusion she wanted, see and hear what I did, and even dig into my memories didn't make it any easier to ignore the huge danger that she represented. And then, of course, there was the knowledge that deep inside, I wanted what she was offering. I'm only human. Lassile promised untold power and knowledge, the ability to protect those close to me and make sure that nothing bad ever happened to them again. I would be a fool not to take advantage of any boon granted to me. Of course, every monster that I banished would end up taking residence in my soul, and I'd be damned, pun totally intended, if I was going to become that which I fought. And then Lassile made it even harder by appearing as one of the most drop-dead gorgeous babes I'd ever seen. She could appear as anything she wanted, but she chose a form that triggered the primordial ugga-ugga in me. The bitch. I shook her arm off of mine. Don't hold on to me like that in public, it's annoying. Besides, I'd thought we'd agreed you wouldn't pop up out of nowhere. My host, you're the one making a scene by shaking like you're having a seizure. She grabbed my arm again and looked up at me. In case you've forgotten, no one can see or hear me but you. Great, so I'm talking to thin air, too. That's going to help these people think I'm less weird. Without me, you wouldn't even understand the snide comments they're saying about you, she said. Is that not a point in my favor? Okay, so I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm not really, completely, totally, all the way fluent in Japanese. Honestly, I sound like a caveman and my accent is as thick as a cab driver's. The huge secret to my success was Lassile. Her illusion powers did more than make me see whatever it was she wanted, it also made me hear and say whatever she wanted. If she wanted me to hear English when someone was talking not English, I'd do so. If she wanted me to speak a foreign language when I couldn't even think it, she'd just cross some wires in the attic and voila, instant universal translator. Just one more perk in a long line of them. And Lassile never failed to bring up what future prizes could be mine if I just opened up door number 1. Do you see why so many others fell to temptation? It becomes hard after a while to resist ultimate power, especially when the person offering it is someone you'd take on a date instead of a black-armored villain with a breathing problem. Still, if there was one thing I was famous or infamous for, it was being as stubborn as a pit bull. It's not like I asked you to do that, I said warily. I was perfectly all right learning my daughter's moon language at a leisurely and acceptable pace. But you wished for it to be easier, Lassile countered. And I exist to make life easier for you, my host. Anything you wish for, I will hand it to you. And all it takes is the low price of my soul. I prefer to think of it as symbiosis. You provide my true self with something it desires, and you gain something in return. I stopped. The small stream of people moved around me, sparing only a glance at the strange, absurdly tall gaijin who was parked in the middle of the street. I looked down at the fake angel, my eyes beginning to blaze with anger. You know what else exists in symbiosis? A parasite. A creature that lives only to consume and then move on to the next host to consume again. A parasite can't offer you what I can, she smiled. A way to protect your daughter. I froze. I knew that Lassile knew about Makoto, there was no way she couldn't have. Still, the idea that the bitch was trying to get on my good side by appealing to my parental love both froze and boiled my blood. Think about it, she continued, ignoring the stony look on my face. There's no need to send her off into the care of another. With what I can give you, you never need worry about those that would harm her again. Any that threaten to would fall underneath your fury like wheat from the harvest. Don't what, mortal? She asked, a sharp bite to her words. Don't present you with a gift very few of your kind will ever have. Don't grant you the power needed to make sure that those beloved by you will never be harmed again. Her grip tightened on my arm. I know what you want. Deep down, much deeper than you want to admit. You're afraid of what can be done to the ones close to you because of what you yourself have done in turn. Her words, while infuriating, were true. I had made a fair amount of enemies in my life, and there were more than a few times that people were harmed simply because they knew me. Sensing my resolve weakening, Lasalle pushed on. You know what I offer. Everlasting life, eternal power, the chance to never again worry about the pitiful fools that hound you. Your precious ones will forever be under your wing, and thus will never want again. She smiled, the sweetest thing I'd ever seen, as thick as honey, and as venomous as a viper. All it would take is for you to take up the coin and proclaim the covenant. Nothing more, and nothing less. It would be so easy to agree. So easy, it'd be a sin. I wrenched my arm away, not caring that I would look like a freak to those around me. Frankly, I wished that Lasalle really was solid, if only so I could strike her. My feelings about hitting women be damned. She'd brought up my inadequacies, my inferiorities, and my inabilities. She'd shown how I could be a far better shield for Makoto than I was now. She'd promised everything I'd ever wanted or could ever want, and I hated her for it. I can't do much to you considering you're pretty much melded to my brain, but I'm sure I can find a deep, dark hole to throw you in until I can come up with something worse. An adorable pout appeared on her face. Really, my host, there's no need for such threats. You should know I'm only trying to help. A really deep pit, with lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Lasalle crossed her arms. Very well. I suppose it would be best to let you think on my proposal. You know where to find me should you wish to discuss this matter further. And just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she was gone. Hell's bells, that never stopped being creepy. Though really, what else could it be when you had a shadow of a literal pseudo-deity renting out your mindscape? I shook my head. Now wasn't the time to dwell on matters like that. Right now, I had to go meet with the Japanese regional warden and hammer out all the details for Makoto's stay before I returned to Chicago. I couldn't leave the place in Ramirez's hands for too long. He was a good kid, but I owed him enough beer as it was. Setting off, it was another hour or so before I finally navigated the maze that was Azabu Jubin's street system and arrived at the White Council's safe house. It looked like just what I expected it to be, a simple and somewhat ramshackle mansion that looked like it had been built back in the 80s. The rest of the neighborhood fit the same motif, so it was camouflaged extremely well and could easily be looked over by any wandering eyes. The building was 3 stories tall and vaguely cube-shaped, with a single wing extending towards the back. The front garden was well cared for, with an iron gate connecting the stone walls that wrapped around the property. As I placed my hand on the gate, a small thrum of power went through my body. So, they'd placed a small ward on the area, did they? It wasn't anything big. Simply an early alert system that would warn anyone inside that someone was entering the premises, the magical equivalent of a doorbell. It was extremely basic, but it was also simple enough to make maintenance easy. Still, it meant that whoever was expecting me now knew I'd arrived. At least I wouldn't have to wait that long at the door. Crossing the yard, I approached the door and knocked on it, not seeing any doorbell. Almost immediately after doing so, the door swung inward, revealing a young woman. She was probably in her early 20s. She had black hair, pale skin, and was what the locals referred to as fox-faced, narrow face with close-set eyes, thin eyebrows, and high cheekbones. That particular look was considered to be aesthetically pleasing to the Japanese, though I preferred my women to have a rounder face. Funnily enough, that kind of look was originally thought to only belong to women that were actually kitsune, or mystical fox creatures, pretending to be human in disguise so that they could fool or seduce people. In actual fact, that wasn't too far off from the truth. Kitsune were apparently yokai, the Eastern equivalent of the fae, and the look was an inherited trait from unions between yokai and humans, changelings, if you would. The girl probably had some yokai blood in her from some distant ancestor. Her long hair was done up in an ornate bun, with a variety of hairpins in the shape of a fan keeping the whole thing together. She was wearing that weird, wraparound dress the Japanese were so fond of, though it was too fancy for a yukata and too plain for a kimono. I didn't know what this variety was called, and I was proud enough just to know the difference between the two I mentioned. The girl looked at me with an emotionless expression, her closed eyes enhancing the effect. You would be Sir Dresden, yes. Her monotone voice added to the stony visage. I smiled and gave a polite bow. Indeed I am. I'm guessing I'm easy to recognize. Sir Arshimaru gave me a description, she said. She glanced me up and down. He did not quite fully describe just how tall you are. That's us Americans, we like things big and bulky. Her expression didn't change at all at my joke. Ouch. Tough crowd. After a moment, she spoke again, indeed. Oh, but where are my manners? I have been informed of you, Sir Dresden, but not you of me. She gave a bow back, deeper than my first one. It is a pleasure to meet you. I am Tomoko Mei, the proprietress of this establishment. Charmed. She nodded back. Please, come in. I will retrieve Sir Arshimaru for you. He has been awaiting your arrival. Opening the door wider, she beckoned me forth. I took a step in and found the invisible force of a threshold parting around me before it snapped back into place. Huh, that was strange. Thresholds were spiritual barriers, and were the main line of defense to stop supernatural creatures from just invading people's homes. If they could even pass through it in the first place, a large chunk of any invader's power would be left behind if they weren't specifically invited past it, like a magical filter. However, thresholds weren't something you could just create. They were natural collections of will built up in areas that were considered to be a safe home. The saying, "A man's home is his castle," applied literally in this regard. I didn't expect to find a threshold, even one as weak as this, to be somewhere that people used as a place of business. Still, it only added to my approval of the safe house. Any extra protection for Makoto was good. Tomoko led me to a communal kitchen, explaining that she would go get the warden. Disappearing quickly around the corner, I was left to my own devices. I took the time to look around, examining the room. It wasn't anything fancy, but I was happy to note that every appliance and storage unit was pre-industrial era. There wasn't going to be anything frying in this place anytime soon. In fact, I stepped over to the stove. Holy crud, this was a traditional fire pit. It wasn't even made of metal, but was carved out of stone and clay. Around the stove were a variety of clay pots, and I resisted the urge to snoop further. If my knowledge of traditional Japanese cooking was accurate, and what I knew was only thanks to Makoto drilling it into my head when she became the de facto family chef, they were probably full of the classic ingredients: miso, salt, sugar, rice, pickles, and the like. Satisfied with my amateur investigation, I turned around and nearly jumped out of my skin. Tomoko was standing not even 3 feet away, her stoic gaze locked onto me. I let out a wheezy laugh. Stars and stones, you startled me. You seemed preoccupied, so I did not want to disturb you, sir. Okay, the whole blank face shtick was starting to get creepy now. I informed Sir Arshimaru, and he said he'd be down to speak with you in a short while. Oh, that's good, good. I trailed off. It was people like Tomoko who I had the hardest time dealing with. I was used to individuals that were larger than life and had the emotional spectrum of the rainbow. Talking with someone who had less an emotional rainbow and more an emotional block of graphite threw me off balance. Ah, I refocused on her. Forgive my rudeness again, Sir Dresden. I did not offer you any refreshments while you waited. I waved her off. Don't worry about it. I'm not particularly in the mood for anything. That will not do, she said. Her voice held a bit more force than before. A little color bled in. As the hostess, it is improper to not at least attempt to make you feel comfortable. Please, allow me to serve you something. Ah, so she was the kind PF person who stood at salute and hated anything that was out of protocol. Hey, well, it was nice to see some form of personality. Now, if she'd only smile, her looks would blow any average Joe out of the water. Well, if you insist. She nodded. Thank you. There was a small clattering and I turned to see the icebox in the corner had opened. I raised an eyebrow when a single can of soda floated out and over to me, settling next to my hand. There was a hiss of escaped carbonation as the pop tab flicked open. I picked up the can, examining it briefly before taking a sip. The sweet taste of Coke flooded my mouth. I smirked. Looks like I've been researched. It is only proper for a hostess to know ahead of time what her guests would enjoy. I asked Sir Arshimaru, and he said that you had a penchant for this beverage. Was my appreciation for the drink really that widespread? Well, I did give it to my cat and dog as a common substitute for water, but that was beside the point. I raised the can in mock salute. I give your sources thanks. Tomoko bowed and stood in place, watching me as I sipped on the drink. I pretended to ignore her while I enjoyed it. It was a bit odd how she'd gone out of her way to show her abilities. Kanetoman C, if I wasn't mistaken. One that was very low on the power scale. I saw how the can wavered around in her magical grasp. That small amount of weight was probably the limit of what she could carry. However, what she lacked in power she made up for in control, evocation being of the wham bam thank you ma'am branch of magic. Not many could carefully levitate an item of that size without turning it into a projectile weapon by accident. Thomas still didn't think my response to his "toss it here" request was all that hilarious. More important than the what and how, though, was the why. Most magic users tended to avoid using their powers unless it was absolutely necessary or because they thought it would advance their standing. For your information, the latter usually ended up badly, like under the silver blade badly. Tomoko using her powers just to get a can of Coke seemed at odds with what little personality I had managed to glean from her. I mentally shrugged. Tomoko didn't seem like the type of power-hungry person I had come across. Maybe she had done it to prove to me that Makoto would be that much safer here. She did take her position as runner of this place very seriously. It wasn't long before the person who I'd come to see walked in. Yamato Arshimaru was also a young man, in his early to mid-20s, with short, black hair, kind eyes, and an average Japanese build. Like most of the wardens, his youth was attributed to the ongoing, full-scale war we had going on with the Red Court. A lot of ours had been killed in action, so conscription rates had gone through the roof and they were shoved into whatever positions they could fill. Hell, the black sheep of the organization, was actually given regional command of Central USA last Halloween, and one of the people who offered it hated my guts with the kind of passion usually only seen in religious fundamentalists. Yeah, the situation was that bad. Arshimaru, however, had a much brighter slate when he was offered the job, for both his abilities and his accomplishments. The closest I could approximate his powers to was that of a weather mage. His specializations were air and water, and combinations thereof. Like Tomoko, his power levels were on the low end, especially compared to magical brutes like myself, but his control over his magic was nothing to sneeze at. He might not have been able to summon huge gales of wind or shoot high-pressure water spouts, but the man could create actual clouds, mini tornadoes, and even alter weather conditions entirely if he had enough time and preparation. Never underestimate a man who could turn your fun summer relaxation into a hellish landscape of rain and lightning at a moment's notice. While his magic was held in high regard, it was what he'd done without it that really clinched the role of Japan's regional commander for him. He'd done what no one else had, made contact with the secretive Jade Court. Of course, he'd only met with peons, the lowest rung of their society, but the fact that he'd reached out to them and they responded at all was a miracle in and of itself. Thanks to him, there was finally verification of their existence beyond rumors and fifth-hand information. It would take a while for any real cooperation between the Jades and Council to come into being, but any little bit helped, and the chance to have an ally against the Reds was too valuable for words. Orochimaru smiled widely when he saw me and walked over, grabbing my hand and giving it an energetic shake. "Warden Dresden, it's a pleasure to meet you again." I returned the shake as heartily as I could. "You too, Warden Orochimaru." He grinned again. The man had a face that would blend into any crowd, but his smile lit up the room like the sun. It was the kind of open, honest smile I could appreciate. "Well, we have a lot to discuss and hopefully enough time to do so." He released my hand and looked over at Tomoko. "Tomoko, you're excused if there's anything else you wanted to do." "As you wish, Sir Orochimaru." She bowed one last time and ghosted out of the room, her feet making no sound as she left. Orochimaru moved back to me. "Well then, Dresden, shall we begin the tour? Lead the way." And so he did, giving me a detailed tour of the entire building. It had separate rooms for each of the boarders, but used a communal format for the kitchen, bath, toilet, and recreational and dining quarters. From what he told me, the history of the building was quite old, ranging all the way back into the Meiji era. It was originally an inn that had been gradually converted over time, and had been in Tomoko's family since it was first constructed, which finally explained why the place had a threshold, limited though it may be. Yes, Tomoko's family had been running the place for a long time now. She's been born and raised to run it ever since she was a child, and I'm guessing she plans on teaching her own children to keep running it for a long time after. "So you've been living here a while then?" "For the last several years," he said. "I helped Tomoko out when I was younger and she repaid the debt by letting me live here, and I eventually set it up as a base for the council." He shrugged. "We've had a few council members and wardens rotate in and out over the years, but it's mostly been the two of us. She seems like the kind of person who wields formality like a weapon, so I'm surprised she just let you convert it into a magical fortress." Orochimaru laughed. "Believe me, it was no easy task to convince her, but I think she understood just what it meant to have a safe place to return to. She's been running the place ever since her parents retired to Kyoto, so I think she knows exactly what it means to have a haven." The corners of my mouth quirked up at the fond hint to his voice. "You two get along well." If he heard the teasing tone in my voice, he either ignored it or was too oblivious to recognize what it meant. "She's a good girl. She confuses a lot of people by not showing her emotions that well, but once you get to know her she can be quite kind. She'll be a positive influence on your daughter, I promise." Makoto could certainly use some of Tomoko's properness rubbing off on her. "The girl takes much too after me for her own good." A small chuckle escaped from Orochimaru's mouth. "Indeed. Well, I'm sure we can hammer some old-fashioned Japanese politeness into your daughter." We both had a laugh at that. Orochimaru cleared his throat before continuing. "In any case, what is your evaluation of the place, Dresden? Does it come up to code?" I gave it a brief moment's thought. The place looked safe and protected enough. There were a variety of small-time wards planted all over the place. Nothing close to the defensive strength of the ones I had back home, but the amount and variety made up for that. The mansion wasn't designed to withstand a zombie horde, no, I won't get into that now, but it did have enough support to warn and protect those inside from minor danger. If moving halfway across the world and residing in the boogeyman's backyard didn't deter lurkers, I doubted having the magical equivalent of a ballista looking you right in the face would. Insane tended to not take that kind of thing into consideration. What about the threshold? I noticed there was one, but it's not exactly up to snuff. You have no need to worry about that, Orochimaru said. The main threshold may be weak, but the ones for each individual room are much stronger. If need be, your daughter can take refuge in Tomoko's or my room until the danger passes. That made sense. The communal and professional aspect of the whole building would reduce the efficacy of the main threshold, but the personal ones should be more powerful in comparison. Still, wouldn't hurt to check. You don't mind if I? Not at all. Please, come with me. He led me to a room in the rear of the first floor. This is the manager's room. It belongs to Tomoko, so it should be the stronger one. He rapped his knuckles on the side of the doorframe, careful not to rip the rice paper of the sliding door. A moment passed before it slid open, revealing Tomoko. Oh, Sir Orochimaru, Sir Dresden, what can I do for you? Warden Dresden was just asking about the personal thresholds, so I came to ask if he could test yours in case his daughter needed to hide here. Of course, Sir Dresden. She turned to the side and moved backwards to let me in. I nodded in thanks and took a step in. Immediately it felt like I was walking through cellophane or the icky skin left on jello and pudding, and I could sense a good portion of my magic power being left behind. This threshold was tens of times stronger than the one on the main entrance and would undoubtedly stop any malcontent trying to force their way in their tracks. Satisfied with what I found, I stepped back out of the doorframe, the feeling of pressure all over my body retreating as I did. I turned to Orochimaru. That's perfect. Thank you. I turned to Tomoko. You, too, Tomoko. That just took a lot off of my shoulders. I'm glad to be of help, sir. With that, she bowed to the both of us and slid the door shut, leaving me and Orochimaru back to our devices. Orochimaru beckoned me to follow and we made our way back to the main entrance. So, I assume everything is in order now. Yeah, everything's good. Thank you again for offering your help. I was on my last leg trying to find a safe place for Makoto to stay while things died down back home. It's no problem at all. Any fellow members of the White Council, let alone wardens, should help each other in their times of need. Well, thanks all the same, I reiterated. We made final checks on the agreement. Makoto would stay in the place for the next school year and then return back home after that. I would stay around for the next couple of days while she settled in and then go back home to resume my duties as regional commander. I couldn't stay that long. After all, Chicago seemed to be attracting a frightening frequency of magical disasters and insane supernatural creatures and warlocks over the last several years. Even without my assistance, things were bound to erupt in flames before too long, and I didn't want Murphy, Thomas, Michael, or the rest to be holding the short end of the stick while I was off gallivanting around in a foreign country. Repeating my thanks, I said goodbye to Orochimaru and left the safe house. I had checked the clock before I left and saw it was shortly after noon. Considering today was a Saturday, that should mean that school only had a half day. Leave it to the Japanese to hold school on the weekend and then only make it partially open so as not to cause a mutiny. Might as well swing by Makoto's school and embarrass her by picking her up. Payback for how we left that morning. Whistling a jaunty tune, I walked out of the yard and towards where I knew Makoto's school to be. However, it wasn't long before I heard someone coughing to get my attention. Turning towards the sound, I saw another police officer coming towards me to ask me some questions. Stars and stones, really? So, Mako, is it really true that your dad's a wizard? Yup. Name in the yellow pages and everything. The what? Paper Google. Oh, neat. Yeah, that's what most people say when they hear about it. I gave a dramatic sigh and hung my head. My papa's a bit of a technophobe, so things like the internet are kinda out of his comfort zone. Well, mine too, but I wasn't about to get into that. But besides that, you're really not all that skeptical about me claiming papa's a wizard. Most people just kinda give me a funny look and pat me on the head like I ate paste as a kid. Why wouldn't I believe you? Usagi asked innocently. I mean, why wouldn't your dad be a wizard? I'm sure lots of people can do magic if they tried. She put a hand behind her head and broke out into a fit of uncomfortable laughter. My eyebrow arched. Suori. Fun fact. Usagi is a horrible liar. The girl has two modes when it comes to lying. Blurt something out and then backtrack, or awkwardly try to change the topic and fail hilariously. I had only known her for a couple hours and she'd slipped enough times that it didn't even take my magic radar to pick up that she was a magic user. Yeah, the electro radar I have. It doubles as a magic one as well. The limitations still apply. I have to be close enough to the person and focused on them for it to work, but unlike Papa, who needs to touch a person to see if they're magical if they're not actively channeling, I can sense the overall power and type of my target. Usagi was low on the totem pole, a minor talent probably. Her power was a bit different from what I'd seen before, being focused in a small node near her heart while most people had their power spread throughout their entire body, but the intensity of that node wasn't all that impressive compared to Papa's aura or even my own. Also, with all the random occurrences I'd heard that happened in Azabu Juban recently, most courtesy of Usagi's babbling, the neighborhood seemed like a hotspot for supernatural activity. So I'd be right at home here, then. Could probably get some good old-fashioned superheroing in if I could dodge my new guardian's watchful eyes. Shaking those thoughts off, I looked at Usagi. We were walking out to the school's front entrance, class having let out early for the day. It was going to take some time getting used to going to school on Saturdays again, especially when the blessed lax American education had spoiled me so, but I think I could survive if we left so early in the day. And I think it would be that much easier with a friend like Usagi at my side. At least my first thoughts hadn't been wrong when I assumed that Usagi was the kind who didn't let go of something that interested her. The girl had quite literally tackled me as soon as the bell rang and dragged me out of class, babbling about everything and nothing the entire way. I almost considered checking the girl to see if she had a slot for the nuclear-powered battery she had to be running on. I briefly mused on whether or not I should tell Usagi I could use magic as well, but decided to hold off until she was more comfortable with talking about her abilities. When I didn't hear Usagi respond, I looked to see that she was staring at me and realized I'd drifted off in thought again. Dang it, I had to